My husband's ex became our neighbor. Then she stalked us and broke into our apartment. Now she's threatening to find us wherever we go. When Jake and I first moved into our new apartment, I thought we'd finally found the perfect place to start our lives together. It was a charming, older building in a quiet neighborhood, with just the right amount of character. We were excited about the move, and everything seemed to be falling into place. But that excitement quickly turned into unease when we discovered who our neighbor across the hall was: Jake's ex-girlfriend, Claire. I remember the moment vividly. We were hauling the last few boxes into our apartment when the door across the hall swung open. Claire stepped out, and the look of shock on Jake's face mirrored my own. He hadn't mentioned much about her, just that they'd dated a few years back and that it hadn't ended well. But now, here she was, living directly across from us. "Oh my God, Jake!" Claire exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. She rushed over, completely ignoring me as she threw her arms around him. "I can't believe you're living here now. This is going to be so much fun." Jake awkwardly patted her on the back before gently prying her off. "Yeah, it's definitely a surprise," he said, glancing at me with an apologetic look. "Claire, this is my wife." Finally, Claire acknowledged my presence, giving me a tight, forced smile. "Of course. So nice to meet you," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "I'm Claire, Jake's ex." Her introduction made my stomach twist, but I forced a polite smile. "Nice to meet you, too." I hoped that would be the end of it, a quick, awkward encounter we could laugh about later. But Claire had other plans. Over the next few days, it became clear that she wasn't just going to fade into the background. She was everywhere. Every time we stepped out of our apartment, Claire was there. She'd accidentally run into us in the hallway, linger outside our door, and make excuses to come over. She was always friendly, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something that made me uneasy. Before we go deeper into this nightmare, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to keep up with the madness. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this all plays out. At first I tried to be understanding. Maybe she was just lonely, or maybe she was trying too hard to be friendly. But soon, Claire's behavior crossed the line from annoying to downright intrusive. She started leaving notes on our door with helpful tips about the building. Things like, "Make sure to double-check the lock on the laundry room door," "It sticks sometimes," or "Remember, noise travels, so keep the TV volume down after 10 p.m. It felt less like advice and more like she was trying to assert some weird dominance over us, as if she knew the building better than we did and wanted to remind us of it constantly. Jake laughed it off, saying Claire was just being her usual overbearing self. He insisted there was nothing to worry about, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The notes were weird, but what bothered me more was the way Claire was always around. It was like she had a sixth sense for when we'd be leaving or coming home, always managing to pop up at the most inconvenient times. One evening, after an especially long day at work, I came home to find Claire standing outside our apartment waiting for us. She had a plate of cookies in her hands and a wide smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, neighbor," she chirped. "I baked these for you two. I remember Jake loved them when we were together." The way she emphasized "together" made me bristle. I forced a smile and took the plate, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thanks, Claire. That's really thoughtful of you." Jake came up behind me looking slightly embarrassed. "Thanks, Claire. We appreciate it." She beamed at him, completely ignoring me again. "Anything for you, Jake. You know I'm just across the hall if you ever need anything." With that, she gave me a quick, dismissive glance and disappeared into her apartment, leaving me standing there with the cookies in my hands and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Claire was up to something. The way she looked at Jake, the way she inserted herself into our lives, it was too much. Later that night, as Jake and I were settling into bed, I brought it up. "Jake, don't you think Claire's behavior is a little odd?" He sighed, rolling over to face me. She's just trying to be friendly, that's all. I know she can be intense, but she's harmless. If it makes you uncomfortable, I can talk to her." I appreciated that he was willing to talk to her, but I wasn't sure it would help. Something told me that Claire wasn't just being overly friendly, she was crossing boundaries on purpose. But I didn't want to seem like the jealous wife, so I let it go. "I'll be fine," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "Just let's keep some distance, okay?" Jake nodded and pulled me close, and for a while I let myself believe that everything would be fine. But deep down, I knew that Claire wasn't going to go away that easily, and I was right. In the weeks that followed, Claire's presence became an inescapable part of our lives. No matter what time of day it was, she always seemed to be nearby, watching us, waiting for the right moment to insert herself into our routine. What started as mild annoyance quickly escalated into something much more sinister. One Saturday afternoon, Jake and I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. We needed a break from unpacking and a little fresh air to clear our heads. As we were heading out, we bumped into Claire in the hallway. Again. This time she wasn't alone. She had cornered one of our neighbors, Mrs. Thompson, a sweet older woman who lived 2 doors down. Claire was talking animatedly, but when she saw us, she stopped mid-sentence and waved us over. "Hey, guys!" Claire called out, her voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. "I was just telling Mrs. Thompson about the building meeting next week. You're coming, right?" Jake and I exchanged a glance. We hadn't heard anything about a meeting. "We didn't know there was one," I said cautiously. "What's it about?" "Oh, just some routine stuff," Claire replied with a casual wave of her hand. "But it's important for everyone to be there. You know, to keep the building running smoothly." Mrs. Thompson looked at us with a weary smile. "Claire's been very helpful with organizing things around here. She's like our unofficial manager." I forced a polite smile, but inside I felt a surge of irritation. Claire had lived in the building longer than us, but she wasn't any kind of authority figure. Yet she acted as if the place was hers, like she had some claim over it, and over Jake. "We'll try to make it," Jake said, steering the conversation toward an exit. "We were just heading out for a walk, though. See you later?" Claire's face darkened for a split second before she forced the smile back on. "Of course! Enjoy your walk, you two. And remember, I'm always here if you need anything." The way she said it, with that unsettling undertone, made my skin crawl. We hurried out of the building, and it wasn't until we were a block away that I felt like I could breathe again. "I don't like how she's always around," I admitted, voicing the unease that had been building in me for days. "It's like she's watching us all the time, waiting for an opportunity to show up." Jake nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, it's starting to bother me too. She's always been intense, but this is different. I think I'm going to have a word with her. Set some boundaries." I felt a wave of relief. "I think that's a good idea. We need to make it clear that she can't just invade our space whenever she feels like it." Jake agreed, but as the days went by, the conversation with Claire kept getting pushed off. Work got busy, and the chaos of moving meant there was always something else demanding our attention. Meanwhile, Claire's behavior grew more erratic. She started showing up at our door at odd hours, with flimsy excuses that barely masked her real intent. Once, she knocked late at night, claiming she'd heard a noise in the hallway and wanted to make sure we were okay. Another time, she showed up early in the morning with coffee, saying she'd made too much and thought we might want some. It was clear she was looking for reasons to be near Jake, and each encounter left me feeling more unsettled. Then one evening, things took a turn for the worse. I had come home late from work, exhausted and looking forward to a quiet night in. But as soon as I walked in the door, I knew something was off. The apartment felt different, wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but there was an unmistakable feeling that someone had been there. I quickly checked the locks, but everything seemed secure. That's when I noticed the smell, a faint, lingering scent of perfume. Claire's perfume. My heart started to race as I moved through the apartment, checking each room. Nothing seemed out of place, but the scent was unmistakable, and it was strongest in our bedroom. Panic started to set in. I grabbed my phone and called Jake, who was still at work. "Jake, did you let Claire into the apartment today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What? No, of course not," he replied, sounding confused. "Why would I do that?" "She's been in here," I whispered, my eyes darting around the room. "I can smell her perfume, and I just have this feeling." Jake cursed under his breath. "I'm leaving work right now. Don't do anything until I get there. Just stay in the living room and wait for me." I hung up, my hands trembling as I paced the living room. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction we'd had with Claire over the past few weeks. It was clear that her obsession with Jake had escalated, but I never imagined she'd actually break into our home. When Jake arrived, he went straight to the bedroom, confirming my fears. The scent of Claire's perfume was unmistakable, and as we searched the room, we found the first real proof that she'd been there, a small, heart-shaped trinket that didn't belong to us, tucked under Jake's pillow. I stared at it, horrified, as Jake's expression hardened. "She must have made a copy of the key somehow," Jake said, his voice cold with anger. "That's the only way she could have gotten in." We both knew what had to be done. Jake immediately called the landlord and demanded that the locks be changed. While he was on the phone, I texted a friend who worked in security, asking for recommendations on cameras. We weren't going to take any chances, not with someone as unhinged as Claire. The locks were changed the next day, and we installed a security camera inside the apartment, aimed at the front door. But despite these precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. Claire's behavior had gone from annoying to outright terrifying, and I couldn't help but wonder what she would do next. A few days later, Claire knocked on our door again, her smile as sweet as ever. But this time I was ready. Jake had spoken to her, setting firm boundaries and making it clear that her behavior was no longer welcome. She acted hurt, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something darker. "I just wanted to apologize if I've been a little too eager," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I've missed having Jake around, and I guess I got carried away. But I promise I'll give you 2 more space." It was everything we wanted to hear, but I didn't believe a word of it. I forced a smile and nodded. "Thank you, Claire. We appreciate that." But as she turned to leave, I noticed the way she glanced back at Jake, her smile fading into a cold, calculating expression. It sent a shiver down my spine. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, I checked the security camera footage, half expecting to see Claire lurking in the hallway. But there was nothing, just an empty corridor. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, but the unease lingered. As I climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that Claire was out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And I was right. The nightmare was far from over. I tried to tell myself that Claire would back off now that we'd set boundaries, but deep down I knew it was just wishful thinking. For a few days it seemed like things might be settling down. Claire wasn't knocking on our door or accidentally running into us in the hallway. We even stopped catching whiffs of her perfume lingering where it shouldn't be. But the tension between Jake and me was still thick. Every time we left the apartment, I was on edge, wondering if she was watching, waiting. Then came the night I'll never forget, the night Claire showed us just how far she was willing to go. It was a Friday, and Jake and I had planned a quiet night in. We ordered takeout, curled up on the couch, and put on a movie. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of normalcy. But that feeling didn't last long. Halfway through the movie, there was a faint sound outside our door. It wasn't a knock, but something softer, like fabric brushing against the wood. My heart immediately started racing. Jake paused the movie, and we both listened, holding our breath. The sound came again, soft, deliberate. Jake exchanged a tense glance with me before grabbing his phone. He pulled up the security camera feed, and I watched his face turn pale as he stared at the screen. "What is it?" I whispered, already knowing the answer. "She's out there," he said, his voice barely audible. "She's standing right by the door." A wave of fear washed over me. I took the phone from him and looked at the feed. There she was, Claire, standing inches away from our door, her head tilted as if she was listening. She wasn't moving, just standing there in the dim hallway, her hair hanging loose around her face, casting shadows over her eyes. I felt sick. "What is she doing?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Jake didn't respond. He just stared at the screen, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. After what felt like an eternity, Claire finally moved. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a key. "Oh my God," I whispered. "She still has a key. But how? We'd changed the locks. There was no way she could have had a copy of the new one. Unless—" "She must have found a way to get a copy made," Jake said, echoing my thoughts. "Maybe she stole the spare we gave to the landlord. I don't know, but we can't let her in." The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. Claire wasn't just being a nuisance. She was trying to break into our home again, and this time she was going to use a key. "We have to stop her," I said, panicking. "We have to do something." Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Call the police. Now." I scrambled for my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I quickly explained the situation to the operator, who assured me that officers were on their way. Meanwhile, Jake stood by the door, his ear pressed against it, listening to Claire's every move. "She's trying the key," Jake whispered, his voice tense. "It's not working. She's getting frustrated." I could hear it too, the faint sound of metal scraping against the lock as Claire tried to force the key to fit. When it didn't work, she let out a low, angry growl that sent chills down my spine. "She's going to try something else," I said, dread pooling in my stomach. "She's not going to stop." Jake nodded, his eyes hard. "We're not opening the door, no matter what." A few minutes passed, each one feeling like an hour. I kept glancing between the security feed and the door, waiting for Claire to give up. But instead of leaving, she started talking. "I know you're in there, Jake," she said, her voice muffled but eerily calm. "I just want to talk. Please, just let me in." We stayed silent, hoping she'd leave if we didn't respond. But she wasn't deterred. "Jake, I know you're angry with me, but you don't have to be. We can work this out," Claire continued, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "I just want to see you. I miss you. I miss us." I felt my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just an obsession. Claire was completely delusional. She genuinely believed that she and Jake still had something between them, despite everything that had happened, despite the fact that he was married to me. "I don't want to hurt you, Jake," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "but I can't let you leave me again. You belong with me. You know that, don't you?" My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. Claire wasn't just trying to get into our apartment. She was prepared to do whatever it took to keep Jake in her life, even if it meant hurting him, or worse. "Where are the police?" I whispered frantically, glancing at the time on my phone. It felt like they should have been here by now. "They're on their way," Jake said, though his voice was tight with anxiety. "Just hang on a little longer." Claire's voice grew louder, more desperate. "Jake, please, I'm begging you, open the door. We can talk. We can work things out just like we used to. Don't do this to us." Then, as if realizing we weren't going to respond, her tone shifted again, this time to anger. "Fine. You want to play games? I can play games too. But you're going to regret this, Jake. I promise you that." Suddenly, there was a loud bang against the door, making both of us jump. Claire was pounding on it with her fists, her voice rising in pitch and volume. "You think you can shut me out? You think you can just move on with your life like I don't exist? You're wrong, Jake. I'm never going to let you go." Jake backed away from the door, his face pale. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that Claire was more dangerous than we'd ever imagined. "Come on, where are they?" Jake muttered under his breath, glancing anxiously at the door. I was about to answer when I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Relief flooded through me, but it was mixed with fear. Would the police get here in time to stop Claire from doing something terrible? "Jake, listen to me!" Claire was screaming now, her fists pounding on the door with terrifying force. "I'm not going to let you leave me. You're mine, Jake. You've always been mine." The sirens grew louder, and I could see the flashing lights through the peephole. Claire must have heard them too, because she suddenly stopped pounding on the door. There was a brief, eerie silence before she spoke again, this time in a low, venomous whisper. "You can run, but you can't hide, Jake. I'll always find you. Always." With that, she turned and fled down the hallway just as the police arrived. The officers quickly entered the building, catching up to her as she tried to escape down the stairwell. They grabbed her and pinned her against the wall, handcuffing her as she continued to scream obscenities, her voice echoing through the corridors. Jake and I watched through the peephole, both of us shaking with a mix of fear and relief. The officers finally dragged Claire out of the building, and as they passed by our door, I caught one last glimpse of her face, twisted with rage, but also something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. I leaned against the door, feeling the adrenaline drain out of me. It was over. Claire was gone, arrested for breaking and entering, and likely a dozen other charges. But even as I tried to reassure myself that we were safe, I couldn't shake the last words she had screamed through the door. She'd find us. No matter what we did, no matter where we went, she'd find us. That night, after the police had taken our statements and the building had quieted down, Jake and I sat in silence on the couch, too exhausted and shaken to say much. We both knew what we had to do. Claire was out of our lives for now, but there was no guarantee she wouldn't try to come back. She was obsessed, dangerous, and completely unhinged. Staying here was no longer an option. "We need to move," Jake finally said, voicing what we both had been thinking. I nodded, my mind already racing with plans. We'd find a new apartment, somewhere far away from this nightmare. Somewhere Claire couldn't find us. We'd change our numbers, maybe even our names if we had to, whatever it took to get away from her for good. But as we started making plans to leave, that sickening sense of dread returned. Claire had already shown how far she was willing to go. What if moving wasn't enough? What if, no matter where we went, she kept her promise? That thought haunted me as we packed up our lives, preparing to leave everything behind. We were running, but how long could we stay ahead of someone who was willing to do anything to keep us in her life? Leaving the apartment behind felt like escaping from a nightmare, but the fear that Claire might find us again lingered like a dark cloud. We moved quickly, finding a new place in a different part of town within days. It wasn't the dream apartment we had originally hoped for. It was smaller, less charming, and far from ideal. But it was safe, and that was all that mattered now. We changed our phone numbers, made sure our new address was unlisted, and even went as far as getting a P.O. box for mail. Jake and I were determined to make ourselves as invisible as possible, hoping to put as much distance between us and Claire as we could. For the first few weeks, it seemed like our precautions had worked. We started to breathe a little easier, slowly settling into our new routine. But the damage had already been done. The experience had left both of us on edge, constantly looking over our shoulders. Every time the doorbell rang, my heart would race, half expecting to see Claire standing there with that twisted smile. Every unknown number that showed up on our phones made us jump. Even when nothing happened, the fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Jake tried to reassure me, but I could see the stress wearing on him too. He wasn't sleeping well, and his usually easygoing demeanor had been replaced with a constant vigilance. We both knew that Claire was dangerous, but the uncertainty of when, or if, she would show up again was eating away at us. Then one night, the fear that had been simmering finally came to a boil. It was late, and Jake and I were getting ready for bed. The new apartment was quiet, almost eerily so, but we had gotten used to it. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard Jake's phone buzz on the nightstand. It was an unfamiliar number, and my stomach dropped. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my attempt to stay calm. Jake frowned as he picked up the phone, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "I don't know. Probably a spam call." He was about to ignore it when the phone buzzed again, this time with a text. I watched as he opened it, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jake handed me the phone, and I felt my blood run cold as I read the message. "Found you." I stared at the words, my mind reeling. How could she have found us? We had taken every precaution, done everything right. But somehow Claire had managed to track us down. My heart pounded in my chest as a second message came through, this one with a picture attached. It was a photo of our new apartment building taken from across the street. She was close. "She's here," I whispered, the realization sinking in like a stone. "She's right outside." Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and immediately called the police, his voice firm and urgent as he explained the situation. Meanwhile, I ran to the window, peering through the blinds. The street below was dark, illuminated only by a few streetlights, but I couldn't see anyone. Still, the knowledge that Claire was somewhere out there watching us sent waves of panic through me. The police arrived quickly, much faster than they had before. We met them at the door, explaining what had happened. They searched the area thoroughly, but Claire was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but the chilling evidence that she had been there. The officers tried to reassure us, but the fear had already taken root. Claire had found us once. What was stopping her from doing it again? They took down the information, promised to patrol the area, and advised us to stay vigilant. But it wasn't enough. No matter what they said, I knew we would never truly feel safe again. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat up in bed listening for any sound, any sign that Claire might be lurking outside. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made us jump. The hours dragged on, and by the time the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. "This can't go on," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "We can't keep living like this, always looking over our shoulders, always waiting for her to show up." Jake nodded, dark circles under his eyes. "I know, but what can we do? We've already moved, changed our numbers. What else is there?" I didn't have an answer. It felt like we were trapped, caught in a nightmare we couldn't escape. Claire had made it clear that she wasn't going to stop, and the fear of what she might do next was paralyzing. But as I sat there, staring out the window at the morning light, something inside me hardened. I was done running, done hiding. "We need to fight back," I said finally, my voice steady. "We need to make sure Claire can't hurt us, or anyone else, ever again." Jake looked at me, his exhaustion giving way to resolve. "You're right. We need to take control of this situation before it gets any worse." We spent the next few days gathering everything we had on Claire, every note, every message, every interaction. We documented everything, building a case against her that was impossible to ignore. Jake even reached out to a lawyer, someone who specialized in stalking and harassment cases, to explore our options for getting a permanent restraining order. It was a long shot, but it was something. Meanwhile, we didn't let our guard down. We installed more security cameras, this time covering every angle of the apartment, inside and out. We made sure the police had our address flagged, so any call from us would be treated as high priority. It wasn't much, but it gave us a small sense of control in a situation that felt completely out of our hands. Then, one afternoon, we got a call from the lawyer. The restraining order had been granted, and not just a temporary one, a permanent order that would make it a criminal offense for Claire to come anywhere near us. It wasn't a guarantee of safety, but it was a significant step. Claire was now officially recognized as a threat, and the law was on our side. The days that followed were tense, but there were no more texts, no more late-night visits, no more signs that Claire was watching us. It was as if she had finally gotten the message. I wanted to believe that she was gone for good, that we could start to rebuild our lives without the constant shadow of fear hanging over us. But it wasn't that easy. Every time I stepped outside, I found myself scanning the area, looking for any sign of her. I checked the security camera feeds multiple times a day, and I never let my guard down. Claire had taken something from us, our sense of safety, our peace of mind, and getting it back wasn't going to happen overnight. But we were determined to try. As the weeks turned into months, the distance between us and Claire grew. The fear began to fade little by little, replaced by cautious hope. Jake and I started to rebuild the life we had been forced to abandon, focusing on the future instead of the past. But the memory of Claire and the terror she had inflicted on us would never completely disappear. In the end, we learned to live with the uncertainty, knowing that we had done everything in our power to protect ourselves. Claire might still be out there, somewhere, but she no longer had the hold over us that she once did. We were free, finally. As I sit here writing this, reflecting on everything that happened, I realize how much this experience changed us. It tested our relationship, our resilience, and our courage. But it also brought us closer together. Jake and I survived something terrifying, something that could have broken us, but instead, it made us stronger. Thank you for sticking with me through this crazy, twisted journey. If you've ever dealt with a situation like this, or if you have any thoughts or advice, I'd love to hear from you. How do you move on from something like this? How do you rebuild your life after someone has tried to tear it apart? Let me know in the comments. I could really use some insight as we continue to navigate this new chapter of our lives.